Robby, what's on your radar?
Let's get to it. A civil war of sorts broke out amongst right-wing media political commentators over the weekend after Kevin Roberts, the president of the Conservative Heritage Foundation, released a statement defending Tucker Carlson against attacks from fellow conservatives. Now, Roberts said he would never heed calls for Heritage to distance itself from Carlson. Quote, "There has been speculation that Heritage is distancing itself from Tucker Carlson over the past 24 hours, he wrote on X. I want to put that to rest right now." He also released a video asserting the right to critique the state of Israel while remaining a conservative in good standing. Let's watch part of that.
I'll have more to say on this in the coming days, but today I want to be clear about one thing. Christians can critique the state of Israel without being anti-Semitic. And of course, anti-Semitism should be condemned. My loyalty as a Christian and as an American is to Christ first and to America always. When it serves the interests of the United States to cooperate with Israel and other allies, we should do so, with partnerships on security, intelligence, and technology.
Well, why was Roberts being called to distance himself from Carlson in the first place, and why did he feel the need to defend the right to criticize Israel? Well, Carlson recently interviewed Nick Fuentes, a right-wing podcaster and provocateur who harbors anti-Semitic, racist, and explicitly white nationalist views. He has claimed that, quote, Jews are running society, black people should be in prison for the most part. He is avowedly pro-Hitler, questions whether 6 million Jewish people really died in the Holocaust. He has stated his goals thusly, quote, all I want is revenge against my enemies and a total Aryan victory. So one would hope to find Fuentes toiling in relative obscurity, known only to the most studious observers of weird internet subcultures. Unfortunately, Fuentes is shaping up to be the year's major conservative breakout star, well-positioned to be one of the spiritual successors to Charlie Kirk, the conservative activist and organization leader who was murdered on September 10th. Now, Kirk himself despised Fuentes, of course, and worked with other leading conservative voices like Ben Shapiro to sideline and marginalize him. For Fuentes, the resentment was perfectly mutual, and his followers, the Groypers, would harass staffers at Turning Point USA, Kirk's youth organization. But in the wake of Kirk's death, efforts to gatekeep the conservative movement and ensure that Fuentes remains a marginal figure within it are clearly failing. This week, a major line was crossed. Tucker Carlson interviewed Fuentes on his show. The 2-hour conversation has racked up 16 million views on X. Now, many conservatives are furious that Carlson would interview Fuentes in the first place and have called for denunciations, not just of Fuentes, but also of Tucker Carlson for platforming him. Now, while the statement from Heritage initially said only that Roberts abhors Fuentes, he later issued a stronger statement describing and condemning Fuentes' racism and anti-Semitism. He wrote, Nick Fuentes' anti-Semitism is not complicated, ironic, or misunderstood. It is explicit, dangerous, and demands our unified opposition as conservatives. Fuentes knows exactly what he is doing. He is fomenting Jew hatred, and his incitements are not only immoral, they are unchristian, and they risk violence. For those, especially young men, who are enticed by Fuentes and his acolytes online, there is a better way. Now, the background to all this is the increasing salience of the Israel issue, which now divides Republicans somewhat. Conservatives who are older, evangelical, and getting their news from television, from Fox News, Newsmax, etc., tend to be very supportive of Israel and of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also continued U.S. military support for that country's war on the terrorist group Hamas. Conservatives who are younger, Catholic, and get their news from independent podcasts tend to think that America should be less involved in the Middle East, less financially supportive of Israel, and less tied to the Israeli government's wholesale destruction of Gaza, which has killed nearly 70,000 people. Now, it's perfectly possible to associate with the latter camp while also rejecting, of course, anti-Semitism, racism, and Holocaust denial. In fact, I would argue that is morally correct to have that exact position. But Fuentes is clearly steering the right toward a wholesale embrace of bigotry. Now, conservative critics of Fuentes and Carlson are understandably concerned about this. National Review assailed Carlson, for instance, for conducting an overly friendly chat and failing to challenge any of Fuentes' noxious views. Josh Hammer, a conservative speaker, called for Carlson to be blackballed in addition to Fuentes, and the Babylon Bee, conservative satire site, mocked Carlson relentlessly. Now, the problem for these conservatives is that their side is clearly losing. Fuentes is gaining influence, which means, importantly, that deplatforming Fuentes will not work. In the olden days, when a handful of conservative media organizations ruled the roost, well then, yeah, it would have been trivially easy to simply blackball Fuentes and ensure that he remained an obscure figure. That's no longer possible. The conservative media ecosystem, like the mainstream media ecosystem, frankly, is just too wide open and freewheeling. No central entity directs it. Conservative magazines won't print Fuentes, and conservative TV channels won't invite him on, but he can appeal directly to the people via social media. Moreover, social media platforms themselves, X, YouTube, Facebook, etc., have been explicitly discouraged by conservatives from doing any kind of effective gatekeeping and have largely moved away from this type of content moderation. They're not going to do it. Additionally, all the usual arguments against censorship apply here. Refusing to engage with Fuentes could make his arguments seem powerful, hypnotic, and ultimately more appealing. It appears as if opponents of Fuentes are afraid of a fair fight or lack the courage of their convictions. Younger conservative viewers might think some hidden or dangerous truth is being kept from them. In this way, deplatforming will backfire and guide the right toward the exact sort of conspiratorial thinking that they are trying to stop. In fact, it's fairly clear that attempts to deplatform Fuentes contributed to his own racial radicalization. In his interview with Carlson, Fuentes admitted that his racist, anti-immigrant, and anti-Semitic views became more extreme over time precisely because he was shut down by leading conservatives whenever he tried to raise more innocent questions about U.S. support for Israel. In his telling, conservatives like Shapiro and Dave Rubin, who prided themselves on opposing cancel culture and censorship and wanting to openly debate controversial ideas, utterly refused to platform any sort of debate on U.S. foreign policy with respect to Israel. Now, their hypocrisy caused Fuentes to become more and more extreme. We don't necessarily need to take Fuentes' word for all that, of course. It's possible he secretly harbored awful prejudices all along. In any case, he's achieved escape velocity, he's in conservative discourse now, and pretending he doesn't exist won't make him go away. Now, debating Fuentes could work if it's done correctly. The Carlson interview was, in my view, by Carlson standards, certainly too soft. When Carlson wants to eviscerate someone, he's very good at doing so. See, for instance, what he did to Ted Cruz. He was more than capable of challenging a variety of points that Fuentes made. For instance, at one point, Fuentes evinced an affection for Joseph Stalin, who's a communist and mass murderer who's actually despised by everyone on the right. Unfortunately, Carlson never followed up on that. It's not true, however, that the interview was entirely friendly to Fuentes. At several points, Carlson explained that both his Christian faith and conservative beliefs compelled him to reject that kind of identitarianism, collectivism, and racism that Fuentes regularly practices. He correctly articulated that position that one can and should and must oppose Israel's slaughter of innocent Gazans without blaming it on the Jews as a people. Would have been additionally useful, however, for Carlson to scrutinize Fuentes' actual past statements because Fuentes has not shied away from saying grossly ridiculous things about, for instance, the goodness of Hitler. Podcasters should not avoid Fuentes, but if they talk to him, they should actually grill him on the things he has said. For instance, when Carlson interviewed Cruz, he challenged the senator to state the population of Iran, the country that Cruz fervently desired for the U.S. to attack. Cruz's failure to even ballpark that number made it look like, well, he didn't know what he was talking about. Well, apply that technique to Fuentes, too. So to all the conservatives, in summary, who oppose cancel culture and champion open debate, now is the time to stick to that principle. Don't ostracize people for engaging very bad ideas. Welcome the engagement and participate in it by waging war against those ideas. That is the best weapon we have.
That was thoughtful.
Thank you.
And really good. But I think that when we look at Fuentes, the concern to me is the word rising star next to his name. And as somebody who looks at and really detailed and researches and aligns in some ways with MAGA, doesn't it concern you like the same way it would concern me if somebody of that stature and of those ideologies was becoming a quote unquote rising star of a party? Like every time somebody does something that's extremely racist or something that's out of line, I'll be the first one to be like, listen, no. And I think you and I both are that way. So when you say rising star, it makes you concerned about, well, who's in MAGA that's supporting these ideas? What type of people are we developing, culturing, nurturing? Like that's weird to say the least.
No, I am concerned about it. But I think ignoring it and just trying not to feature him anywhere or deplatform him just won't work. It's not an appealing strategy. It is bringing more people to his side. So the only way, if you want to minimize his power, this is my advice to conservatives, would be to challenge him directly. Not indirectly try to cancel the people who interviewed him. You can dislike how Tucker did the interview. I have criticisms of it. But I think being mad at Tucker for doing it betrays a kind of, almost there's a fecklessness to that. Just be mad at Nick Fuentes, and don't even be mad at him. Just say, you're wrong, your ideas are bad, here's why they are bad. That's the affirmative way to proceed. It's as simple as that. Instead of this, circuitous, like, well, I want to attack the people who are attacking him or defend the people who are defending. No, set all that aside. We're not deplatforming him. Let's just have the actual debate.
From my purview, it looks that Trump is the only glue right now of the MAGA party. And it seems like when he dissolves, obviously he can't run again. I don't know what that looks like when you have like J.D. Vance at the helm.
Nick Fuentes hates J.D. Vance.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't know what
he's married to an Indian woman. Well, he said that's wrong, and he would rather support Gavin Newsom, who has a nice, pretty white family. That's the
type of person we're dealing with.
That's the type of person who's rising in.
So then
in the
what?
ranks, yes.
What? And then they're saying he's following behind Charlie Kirk, and some people should expel that idea immediately. Especially if you tell me that Charlie Kirk is somebody who was like to debate, was open to ideas, was not forwardly trying to. He wanted to engage in debate rather than just push racist ideologies. Like, I think that this person should be kind of shunned out of the party if this is the type of thing they're saying, that J.D. Vance...
Right, I'm not saying I'm shunned. I would say, no, debate him and explain why that is a bad view and a wrong view and a noxious view. And I believe that good ideas will beat bad ideas if they're allowed to be debated in the open. That's my view. We'll find out.
I don't like to cancel people, but I'll say he's one of the people that I say can go and get canceled. Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, a continuation of what I had to say yesterday, Ben Shapiro is now speaking out. The conservative commentator spent his entire show yesterday on a monologue denouncing Tucker Carlson for interviewing Nick Fuentes, a self-proclaimed anti-Semite and racist who's nevertheless gaining influence among Gen Z MAGA types. Fuentes has been persona non grata on the right for a long time, but young conservatives, they disagree with older conservatives about U.S. military aid to Israel, and Fuentes' long-standing opposition to that policy is attracting younger members of the GOP, particularly males, to his way of thinking. And yeah, that is worrisome because while I too think the U.S. should be less supportive of Israel, Fuentes has a whole host of other views that are bad and insane. He thinks women fantasize about being raped, that Adolf Hitler was objectively cool, and that most black people should be put in prison. And so Shapiro is calling him out, and he's also calling out Carlson for interviewing Fuentes without fundamentally challenging him on any of his crazier statements. Let's watch.
The issue here isn't that Tucker Carlson had Nick Fuentes on his show last week. He has every right to do that, of course. The issue here is that Tucker Carlson decided to normalize and fluff Nick Fuentes, and that the Heritage Foundation then decided to robustly defend that performance. Those who criticize both Tucker and Heritage aren't canceling. They are quite properly drawing a moral line.
Later in his monologue, Shapiro explained that people like Tucker Carlson, who platform such ideas and then don't debate them, have no place in the conservative movement. Let's watch.
And Americans are not pro-Putin, pro-Iran, pro-China, pro-Venezuela, pro-Hamas, pro-Fuentes, pro-Tate idiots like Tucker Carlson. They hate this vile garbage. If Republicans decide to cower before the likes of neo-Nazis and their propagandizers, they deserve to lose. And they will lose. Neo-Nazis and their propagandizers are not Republicans. They're not America First. They're not MAGA. They sure as hell aren't conservative. These people aren't to my right. They're not attached in any way to the fundamental principles of conservatism.
Now look, I like and admire Ben Shapiro a lot. I also like Tucker Carlson, even though I disagree with him quite often. I do think he should have grilled Fuentes harder. It's fine to spend some of that interview asking Fuentes personal questions about how he arrived at his views, but at some point, if your guest is known for repeatedly claiming that Hitler was a hero, you have to call him out on that. So I agree with conservatives who are saying that fringe racists and anti-Semites should be vigorously denounced, not canceled, mind you, but debated and then defeated. That said, pro-Israel conservatives need to be honest about the reason that Fuentes is gaining ground. It's not because love for Hitler is spreading or that young people are becoming more racist and more anti-Semitic. I just don't believe that. It's because Israel's recent actions, its military campaign over the course of the last 2 years, is a major image problem for that country. Now, some people on the right, even in centrist or mainstream circles, are trying really hard to avoid this obvious fact. Our social media feeds, though, have been flooded with pictures and videos of Palestinian women and children being blown apart by Israeli bombs. So it seems obvious to me that the rise in anti-Semitism on both the right and, of course, the left, mind you, has something to do with Israel's wars being a much more central news and policy topic in the last 2 years. Now, it's true, of course, that Fuentes would remain an anti-Semite even if American foreign policy exactly mirrored his preferences. And anti-Semitism, one of the world's oldest prejudices, will endure in the hearts and minds of all too many people, regardless of what happens. But look, It's extremely naive to think that Israel's actions and the U.S.'s backing of them are playing no role in increasing anti-Semitism. Frankly, that would be quite unusual. Just as anti-Muslim sentiment increased after 9/11 and anti-Japanese sentiments increased after Pearl Harbor, the images of dead and injured Palestinians that have almost certainly damaged Israel's standing in the eyes of many are available. And the reputation of Israel, the home of the Jewish people, is inexorably tied to anti-Semitism. So to be abundantly clear, this doesn't actually mean it's correct or fair to change one's feelings about an entire ethnic group because of their government's actions. Collective guilt and collective punishment are, in my view, evil tendencies. Nor does it mean that the U.S. turning its back on Israel is necessarily good policy. We can debate that further. But Fuentesism is spreading and winning in part because Israel's standing with conservatives, in particular young conservatives, is falling. Everyone who aspires to swiftly stem the rising tide of anti-Semitism should hope for the decreased salience of Israel's wars as a focus of political discussion. At the very least, if the U.S. would adopt a true America First policy and cut off foreign military aid, not even specifically to Israel, mind you, but to all other nations, it would go a long way toward minimizing this issue. And it would be what voters want. I suspect that would be the best way to counter the bad ideas that Nick Fuentes, for instance, holds.
I think Ben Shapiro made a good point. I mean, just like the same way that I don't want to be attached to anybody who's on the most fringe parts of what people are describing or attaching to a party, I don't think that anybody in a party should absolve or take in those views that are just straight up wrong, right? There, we're talking about racism. We're talking about people that have no moral ground to stand on. So why are we even inviting them to the conversation? And I think when you talk about identity politics within MAGA, I'm looking at what just happened with the New York young Republicans that had racist Nazi messages in their group chat. That should just be easily condemned in the same way that Fuentes should be easily condemned. They're not now invited to talk about why they're being racist. They can go learn it on their own. I don't feel like it's up to the person that understands the history of this country to always explain to somebody why, or the history of the Holocaust, to explain to somebody why they belong at the table. Once you just read a book, then you can come to the conversation and talk about Israel, because it's not the only thing that Fuentes is saying. And so by inviting him in and saying, then challenge him, I think people have a right to criticize Tucker Carlson for inviting him there and not challenging him on all those things.
Criticize him. It's whether.
Well, Ben Shapiro is saying, I don't want him, don't say he's on the far right. He's not, nobody that's, we don't want to acknowledge
Ben Shapiro is trying to run him out of the conservative movement entirely, saying he should not be treated like a conservative.
I think that's a fair criticism.
I don't agree with that because, look, there's a difference on foreign policy, but I condemn the racist views of Nick Fuentes, many of his views, but what the non-interventionists will say, they'll say, well, you work yourself into a blind fervor, a fury over the racist views of Nick Fuentes, but in their view, Israel, for instance, is again, I'm just saying this is their view, Israel's committing a genocide. Why is racism worse, or having personally racially animated views, is that obviously worse than supporting genocide?
There are a lot of people that speak to, there are obviously a lot of people that speak to genocide, what's happening in Israel, not supporting Benjamin Netanyahu endlessly, that are not Fuentes. And so that's what I'm saying. It should be concerning to you that MAGA or the conservative movement is propelling this man, that millions of people become part of his coalition when he does attach that to all of his other ideologies.
Well, the Democratic Party isn't throws to anti-Semitism on the left.
Saying, and I would say that same thing. If anybody was being propelled in that way, I would be like, what's wrong with you guys?
But I would say I would say the same thing to Democrats that I'm saying to Republicans, which is those views
let them in, say that they're far left.
Because the people are more opposed to our aid to Israel than the party is. And so the people who have really ugly views about this are gaining influence. And the only way to minimize them is to change that policy.
But I also don't want to hear from the racist about his thoughts on Israel. I just don't want to hear from you. If you want to come to the table and start from a moral standing. I don't want to hear from
people who are making excuses for the butchering of women and children about racism.
Okay, so let's not hear from them.
Well, then we're not going to hear from anyone, right? Then we're just not talking to anyone except people who
People who just understand, like, why? You should be concerned, Robby, that somebody who's being propelled within the MAGA base is somebody who has all these views that you have said twice now in two different radars, are completely obnoxious, racist, demeaning, condescending to big, large swaths and groups of people, offensive. Why is that person being propelled? And if you're not questioning that as the first,
why? Because they have,
and that's acceptable to
Israel,
you. And so Ben Shapiro saying that's not acceptable. He's not part of my party, and I would say the
neither
same
are
thing.
pro-war views are not acceptable to, like, are also views I disagree with. I don't know. I don't like this sorting of like, this is unacceptable, but this is legitimately debatable. It's all legitimately debatable, and we're going to argue against what we think is right. We're going to argue for what we think is right and against what we think is
legitimately debatable whether the Holocaust happened or not. This is some things that Fuentes is saying. It's not legitimately debatable.
Well,
it's a fact.
I would argue again. What do you mean legitimately debatable?
It shouldn't debate. I don't think somebody should get a platform. I agree with that part of it. Why are they getting a platform?
They have a platform.
A Holocaust denier.
You can't deplatform people anymore. Social media is impossible. Those views are out there, so you can ignore them and pretend I'm not engaging it, so it doesn't exist. Or I would talk to that person and challenge
them in any way.
Challenge the view. Yes,
which Tucker Carlson failed to do.
That's where I disagree with him. And that's where I disagree with him. Yes.
Robby, good morning, and what's on your radar?
Let's get to it. The New York Times is weighing in on the rise of Nick Fuentes, a self-described white nationalist, racist anti-Semite, by making him look cool. What is going on? Now look, if you've missed my radars this week, here's a recap. For the past few mornings, I described the burgeoning conflict in conservative media and commentary between two warring factions. On one hand, you have traditional neoconservative, pro-Israel voices who are represented by figures like Ben Shapiro, Josh Hammer, Mark Levin, etc., versus non-interventionist and anti-Israel factions represented by the likes of Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith. Now, that conflict has become open war now that Shapiro and others have called on conservative media figures to disassociate from Carlson after he interviewed Nick Fuentes, the leader of this Groyper movement, which is not merely anti-interventionist, but also anti-Semitic and racist. Now, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, may have to resign after defending Carlson and only weakly criticizing Fuentes. Staff of the conservative think tank are in open revolt, and some are demanding his ouster. Carlson, however, maintains this isn't really about anti-Semitism or racism or the other disturbing and fringe views of Fuentes. It's about what American foreign policy will look like after President Donald Trump is no longer the leader of the Republican Party. Here he was on Dave Smith's show responding to Ben Shapiro's campaign against him.
This is a fight over what happens after Donald Trump. What does the Republican Party look like? Does it actually adopt an America First foreign policy as promised 10 years ago? Or does it maintain its neoconservative posture, which is very unpopular with the public and has borne no fruit? I mean, it's been a disaster on every level for the United States for, since 9/11, at least. But what happens after Trump goes? And that's what this is about. That's why they're vesting the energy in this. That's what the rage is about, because they don't want to lose control of foreign policy. I just can't say that enough. It's about foreign policy. They don't care about domestic policy because they don't care about the United States, but they do care about the U.S. Treasury and the Pentagon, the projection of force on behalf of Israel.
There's something to that. For years, Trump has vowed to deliver an American-first foreign policy agenda that extracts the U.S. from burdensome foreign entanglements. Now, that doesn't mean turning our backs on our allies and refusing to engage with the rest of the world. It simply means prioritizing the domestic needs of the American people and disentangling the country from military inventions overseas that are endless, counterproductive, and contrary to our interests. I'm with Carlson and Smith on that. Now, at the same time, it doesn't do the non-interventionist cause much good to become primarily identified with the likes of Nick Fuentes, who thinks Hitler is cool and that women enjoy rape and that Jews are running society. Fuentes is toxic and will sabotage the America First agenda as assuredly as he is bent on sabotaging the conservative movement. For example, he does not support Trump, voted against him in 2024, and has said he would not back J.D. Vance for president because Vance is married to an Indian woman. I'm not calling for him to be canceled or deplatformed, mind you. I'm just calling on everyone who supports his views on non-interventionism to perhaps express some caution here. And if you won't take my word for it, consider that the New York Times is now boosting Fuentes as the successor to Charlie Kirk, the recently assassinated conservative media figure who loathed Fuentes and worked to minimize his influence. Now, in a recent column, the Times wrote that Fuentes is becoming Kirk's successor. While the column itself is mostly a fine overview of all the conservative infighting, the image of Fuentes that accompanies the photo, which unfortunately we can't show here, actually makes him look cool. It's in black and white, from a favorable angle. It's reminiscent of perhaps James Dean. On social media, Ashley Rinsberg points out that the same photographer who created this photo, this attractive photo of Fuentes, is responsible for photos of RFK Jr., Eric Adams, Kash Patel that all make them look weird, aloof, distant, confused, isolated. But not Fuentes for some reason. Why does the Times want him to look cool? Do they want him to be the next Charlie Kirk? Why would that be the case? Perhaps there's a lesson to be drawn there. And I encourage everyone to go on social media and look at it. You know, we have a rights usage. We don't own the photo, so I can't show it here. But it's an astoundingly flattering photo of this man compared to all the other photos that this photographer, who does a specific black and white style, has done for Kash Patel and other people.
You pointed the article to my attention yesterday, and thank you, because I was like, wow, this is interesting. I really don't know that this should be a story about the photographer and how a photo makes a white nationalist look. I think the bigger issue is the real story that the audience and the political faction that's there for this person, Fuentes, that's gaining traction within what people are describing as the right party. I think that it's fine for Tucker Carlson to have an interview with him, because Tucker Carlson, you have to remember, February 2024 interviewed Vladimir Putin, like literally went over there, interviewed him, sat down against everyone's will, I think, for the most part.
Well,
and he still asked questions, and a lot of people and reports have proven many things that Putin told him just simply were propaganda that he didn't push back on. So this is not like some new trend he started with Fuentes. This is just when Putin goes into interviews that he knows might be contentious, he decidedly either pushes back when he thinks it's a comfortable situation or doesn't. And I think on foreign policy is one of those areas where he's happy to push back. So he's allowed to do whatever he wants as a freestanding, independent journalist, or however he wants to describe himself now, interviewer. But I think, Fuentes thrives on attention, right? He knows by saying things and coming at J.D. Vance's wife or for being an Indian woman, for saying racist statements, that attention will continue to come. And I think by places like the New York Times or Tucker Carlson having him there, and then people being enraged about him being himself, this is just the attention that he's asking for. So now we're just giving it to him.
Well, the New York Times is giving it to him. They are construing him as the leader of their opposition.
And I don't think they should take the bait either. They shouldn't take the bait either, is what I'm saying. I mean, this man is allowed to have an opinion. We are in an ecosystem of thoughts and opinions, whether right, wrong, racist, or otherwise. But people are really asking. I know he had a contentious relationship with Charlie Kirk, so I don't know that Charlie Kirk would approve him being his successor in any way. But I think that when people are looking for a new leader, sometimes they do go to the wrong person. And so if a large swath, and I don't follow Fuentes, I don't listen to anything he says. When people are racist, I clock him out. But when you're saying that he has this huge following and people are following him and he's growing within the party.
He has a growing following.
Okay, so if it's there, then it's there. So ask those people, why are you following this person? Does everything else get eradicated? Also, there's a lot of moral confusion. So if this conservative base and party is the party largely of the religious right and Christians, then why are the problematic statements that he says that are demeaning and racist, and why are those getting wiped away for some other ideologies that he might have?
Right.
Why is his following growing within that base?
Well,
you have to ask yourself and look internally for those
I know why it's growing. It's growing because the establishment, conservative figures, conservative commentators have ignored a growing resentment toward endless military funding for Israel. They've ignored that issue. Fuentes is very vocal on that issue, and he is attracted to people to his side. In the same way that, for instance, during COVID, the left was very supportive of the lockdown measures and the mandates, even though many disaffected leftist people actually opposed that on civil liberties grounds. And so then the couple figures who spoke up and denounced, wait a minute, what about my body, my choice? What about that? I don't agree with this. Those people gained influence, and many of the institutional progressive figures lost influence. Now, that's done because now basically everyone admits we went way too far with COVID stuff. It's that phenomenon all over again, and I am warning conservative leaders to take it seriously and to recalibrate that aspect of the agenda if we want to discredit the other kooky stuff.
And there are a lot of people that are having that dialogue now. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of people were afraid to say anything about Benjamin Netanyahu without being labeled an anti-Semite. And that's what we're talking about, foreign relations.
Right.
We can go into detail about all the other ways that we're getting involved. But we can find common ground and find people to speak up that have large platforms that are not Fuentes, is all I'm saying. And so that person should not continue to be interviewed. There's a lot of people that Tucker Carlson has had on and should have on that to me don't include him.
I would have him on and interview him, but I would just grill him on, I wouldn't just be like, wow, you're so smart about this one thing. I'd be like, let's talk about the other things you think about.
Exactly.
I guess I'm going to get to my radar.
I believe so. What is on your radar, Robby?
Let's do it. There was a major development yesterday regarding the growing feud on the political right over Tucker Carlson's interview with Nick Fuentes. Now, Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation, who initially had defended Carlson and said that Heritage as an organization would never cancel him, has now apologized at great length to his entire staff. Roberts appeared at an all-staff meeting and offered an apology. That was yesterday. He then went on to take questions for 2 hours from staff members, some of whom thanked him and said that they still back him, while others trashed him and said he should resign. That meeting was recorded, and it was shared with the Washington Free Beacon, a conservative news outlet. Here was Roberts' apology.
I made a mistake, and I let you down. And I let down this institution. And I am sorry for that. Period. Full stop. And what I want to do, without making excuses for anything, is explain to you the purpose of and the process by which we posted the video. You can ask whatever question you want. Every question is in bounds.
Over the course of the next 2 hours, Roberts apologized again and then faced comments, many of which were hostile. Here was one.
I stand here today with no ability to say I have confidence in your leadership for this institution moving forward. And I also know that that sentiment is shared by others in this room who, for reasons that I think are perfectly reasonable, especially given what we've seen this last week, are afraid to say that exact same thing openly and directly. But as you yourself have said, now is the time for courage. And Dr. Roberts, over the last week, you have shown a stunning lack of both courage and judgment.
I'll be honest, at this point, I really can't tell whether Roberts is going to keep his job, though it's clear he would like to. If he does keep his job, it will be because he did make clearer that whatever his personal affection for and friendship with Tucker Carlson, the Heritage Foundation cannot and will not be a partner to the platforming of anti-Semitic and racist views. That clarification may or may not satisfy the more establishment elements of the conservative movement. It's certain to turn off the younger, more radical right, which maybe condemns Fuentes' anti-Semitism and racism, but does think that the conservative movement has missed the mark on sticking to Trump's America First foreign policy. Now, I said it all this week, but I'll say it once again. The cardinal mistake that conservatives are making here, in my view, is failing to advance a policy of separating American interests from the interests of this Israeli government. Not Israel writ large, but this Israeli government. To be as clear as possible, younger, male, Catholic conservatives do not think the U.S. should continue to provide military assistance to Israel. Simply have a different foreign policy view than older, more Protestant-leaning or Jewish conservative intellectuals. Fuentes is gaining ground with some of them, precisely because Israel has been such a big news topic over the past 2 years, after that country suffered an horrific terrorist attack and then retaliated with a bombing campaign that has devastated Gaza. I speak of the Israel media cycle with first-hand knowledge. Trust me. After 2 years of this, I have no real desire to further discuss, debate, and scrutinize a conflict half a world away in which I do not believe that America should be involved whatsoever. And I have very little desire for people I otherwise agree with and consider my ideological friends and allies to be at each other's throats over this. As I observed earlier this week on X, you can't win. It's extremely frustrating attempting to hold any sort of nuanced or middle ground opinion with respect to this burgeoning conservative civil war, because on one side, so many people that I like and generally agree with seem to casually shrug off any suggestion that their unwavering support for Israel's wars is creating a PR problem for those who are trying to keep Fuentes at bay. Now, on the other side, I am frequently called an Israel shill, or worse, a genocide supporter, for criticizing the racist, anti-Semitic, and pro-Hitler garbage that is spouted by Fuentes and others. You can't win. So what I propose is for the former camp to give some ground and be far more permissive of criticism of Israel and its government and the U.S.'s support for it, and then for the latter camp to be far more willing to call out the racism, the anti-Semitism, the pro-Hitlerism that's in their midst. If we can't do that, then we will not have a conservative movement much longer.
Strong stuff, Robby. First of all, before we get into discussing the specifics of this in relation to Israel and the conservative movement, I was impressed by that woman in the video clip we played, simply because I like people saying stuff like that to bosses or saying stuff like that, which they obviously do genuinely believe, in a situation that is difficult. She's standing up before the leader of her think tank, her institution, and saying she has no confidence in him. I admire people who do that. So that's one thing. On the more substantive point of this, look, I have been very critical here and elsewhere of Israel's conduct of its war in Gaza. I do that, I would believe, from a sort of human rights, fairness, compassion perspective. I don't like to see a civilian population being slaughtered. I don't want the allyship of people who are anti-Israel because they don't like Jews. I think that's as disgusting a prejudice as any other kind of prejudice, and it completely appalls me. As far as heritage is concerned, the thing that I think that really stuck in a lot of people's craw was Kevin Roberts talking about a venomous coalition against Tucker
in the initial
thing,
yes,
against Tucker Carlson. Whenever, I mean, I think Nick Fuentes is an appalling person, and I think that there are very good reasons to be opposed to the mainstreaming of him, and those people who don't want Fuentes mainstreamed shouldn't be sort of besmirched in that way.
Yeah. As I've said, I occupy a kind of in the middle, frankly, position here that satisfies absolutely no one because, I mean, I agree, Fuentes should not be mainstreamed. I don't think deplatforming or that kind of approach really works anymore because of just anybody's ability to become a high-profile commentator on social media, kind of their own compelling nature, and he is a compelling speaker, unfortunately, and he is funny and he is resonating with young people, so you can't just pretend he doesn't exist. But if you're going to engage him, you have to engage him. You can say, well, and thank you, and I agree with you on this aspect of your foreign policy, but also you said that Hitler was good. He said Stalin was good in the interview with Tucker, and they never circled back to that, even though Tucker said they should. So I think criticism of how he was engaged is and there should have been much stronger. There wasn't criticism at all. There was an agreement that it was fine to do that. Kevin Roberts did endure a real flogging in that 2 hours. I mean, there were some supportive comments. There were others like that. I don't know. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if it was kind of crazy. So he constructs what happened as that his chief of staff wrote the script for that video. His chief of staff is clearly someone more ideologically in sync with what Tucker is doing, and that person has been fired, and he says he's not online enough to understand why those were dog whistles, and he's very sorry for it, and he apologized over and over again. I don't know how I would incline to think if I would be an employee of his, whether I would accept that, but that's his explanation.
I don't love leaders blaming the people beneath them for their own mistakes, I guess, is my bottom line on that one. Whether he survives or not is not something that exercises me a lot. Just briefly on Fuentes, you said something to the effect of, you can't ignore him, you can't pretend he doesn't exist. I mean, you can pretend he doesn't exist. He can certainly build his own audience through his own social media platforms and others, but I'm not entirely sure that there's any need to really be discussing someone like that in the public square.
Yeah, I think he's already achieved escape velocity. I think, I mean, we can't convince the New York Times not to write profiles of him where they airbrush him into looking attractive. I mean, they already have done that. He is going to be portrayed as a breakout star on the right especially because of the attention he's gotten in the last couple of weeks, really. And I'm not sure, I won't say I know exactly how he should be engaged or I have exactly the right strategy and everybody should listen to me. But I think the worst thing would just be putting him on your show and just say, softball, like, oh, well, we can hang out, we're cool, you're cool, without saying, but Hitler.
Right. Exactly.
I want to hear, but Hitler.
Right.
A few more times from Tucker and Dave Smith and other people who have put him on.
And been far too soft, I think, in both our opinions.